withstanding the evidence, with great claims comes great evidence. Now, many Christians over the centuries have made assertions and have claimed that the evidence they have proves, say, the existence of Jesus, or proves that what they have put their faith in is real, and that that we should all believe them. And sometimes Christians will say, no matter what evidence they've brought forth to the skeptic, to the atheist, no amount of evidence is going to convince them. There's that argument out there for that. I don't believe that to be true. I go back to, like I said, with great claims comes great evidence. And if your evidence is on par and it matches your claim, then more than likely you're going to be vindicated, and it's going to prove the claim and show that, yes, what you are saying is true, and that we can have confidence, a certain level of confidence in it, that it is in fact true. One such evidence that I want to show in this video is the Shroud of Turin, right? So this is the burial cloth, allegedly, of Jesus Christ, and was left in the tomb, and it left a silhouette, and most of you probably know and are familiar with this, but if you're not, you can research it and look it up and hear the history on it. Well, allegedly, this cloth is supposed to prove the crucifixion, because Christians throughout the century have tried and grabbed at straws, as desperately as they can to try to find any way to prove that their precious religion is true. They've been accused of, inventing the Gospels, accused of all kinds of things to try to bring validity to their claims. And I think early on, the early Christians did realize that, they didn't really have very good evidence, so they needed to go in and invent this stuff, especially after Paul's writings, which Paul's writings are void of any kind of real deep discussion about the life of Jesus, and yet Paul is the one that lives the closest time and writes the closest time to the alleged time of Jesus. So why would that be? And I've mentioned that a few times in my other videos, but that seems to be pretty suspect to me, because if Paul lived before, Paul would have wrote like the gospel writers and would have had those stories. Though Paul himself never met Jesus except for one time on the road to Damascus, he would have been closer to, say, Peter, James, and John, and so he could have had that dialogue with them. But yet that's not what we read when we read the epistles of Paul. And so we don't get any real life of Jesus stuff until many decades later, quite extensively later in the gospel. So anyways, back to the shroud. So the shroud was tested, allegedly, I forget how far back, and Christians will say, well, it was tested and they found pollen on the shroud that dates back to beyond I think the original dating was back to the medieval days, right? Back to the Dark Ages, the 1400s. And it was dated from back then. But then Christians will say, well, that's the reason that the dating on that was because they were only allowed to test one part of the shroud. See, there's always this circular thing like, oh, of course, yes, if they'd been able to test the entire shroud, they would have found that it would date back even further. But then someone, I had heard, had made the claim that they actually did test, I don't know, a portion of it, and it dated back to the time of Jesus based on the pollen that they were. I'm like, it's just all this he said, she said stuff. So again, it goes back to, this is not great evidence, okay? Your evidence, Christian, needs to be conclusive. It needs to be without a doubt. I mean, beyond a reasonable doubt is what we're looking for here. That, okay, you're making this claim that this stuff is true, then give us great evidence. Because you have these great claims, where's your great evidence? And so back to what I was saying, though, there was Christian will respond with, oh, well, whatever we show you guys, the skeptics and the atheists, you're not going to believe. No, I don't believe that to be true. I think that if someone came up with one iota, whatever it is, of evidence that actually was solid evidence that we could, look at and go, yeah, I mean, you can't really refute that. We've yet to see that. We've yet to see that from the Christian community. And, even if God was to reveal himself to us, that would be quite extraordinary. But yet, he's a silent, invisible God who doesn't want to interfere with free will. And so that's why we don't get to see him. That's why but he makes himself real to people, what? Some kind of warm, fuzzy feeling, or, well, he made himself real to me in my life because he got me that job. Or it's always stuff like that that has other explanations for why these things could have happened. It's never something, like I said, that's so conclusive, like, well, All right, Mr. Skeptic. Yeah, what say you? You've got. How are you going to explain this? I mean, it's never that kind of evidence. It's never that solid of evidence. That's what we are looking for. That's what the skeptic needs to be convinced. And I'll agree. There are some people probably that no matter what, there's just no convincing them. You're always going to have those people. So they're a lost cause. Don't worry about those people. But there are people out there who would look at things and look at the evidence and say, you know what? Yeah, I can't refute this. This is really good. And so, but another thing is I noticed about evidence is that everyone's level of evidence and what they require is different. So what it takes for someone to believe, the next person, it might not take as much. And so you're dealing with that component too as well. But anyways, no, I don't think that the Shroud of Turin is an authentic burial cloth of Jesus. I think Christians have had, throughout the history, throughout time, have had significant reasons to invent and create things because they want to prove so emphatically that this is real. And their faith is real to them. That much we can give them, that their belief is real and their faith is real. It's just what they put their faith and their belief in is the thing that's questionable, that's probably not real. And, again, we don't know for sure, but we can have a certain level of comfortableness and a certain level of certainty that most likely what they're believing in is not true, is not real. No, the shroud is not real. And there's so many other things out there that we can look to that Christians try to offer as evidence, and it's not because you just want to be a naysayer. It's not because you just, no matter what, you just want to refuse to believe because you want to live in your rebellion and live in your sinful life and in rebellion to God. It's not that. That's not what it is. It's that with great claims comes great evidence, and you need to have that. And if you don't have that, and your evidence is shoddy, or it's it's not, then you're not going to convince many people. It's just what you can expect. And so don't be mad and don't be disappointed and don't be like, oh, these heathens, they won't believe. Well, it's because your evidence is not that great. I recently watched a video with a guy that was talking about the book of Daniel. He was I forget the guy's name. He was debating Dan Barker, and it's a young, well-educated, well-articulated young. I think he may have gone to seminary, some type of schooling. He's really good, and he made a great presentation all on how we could prove that the Bible, the Old Testament Bible, is more than just fiction. That it's not fiction. That it's actually really from God, based upon the book of Daniel and all the prophecies that were in there that came true and this and that. But yet, when you read the book of Daniel, Daniel doesn't assign names to these individuals, to these kings and these leaders and these. So it's like you can kind of fill in the blank. Oh, we can put Alexander the Great in there. We can put, and that's what he was doing. It's like, come on, man. It's not. You know what I mean? It's not that conclusive. Kind of like when they were talking in the book of Isaiah, I think it's 7:14, where it talks about, and the woman shall give birth to a child, the birth oracle about a king will be victorious in battle, and how that he goes to later on lose that battle because, he's asking for a sign from God, and the sign is that, give birth. But it's not. Oh, and because Matthew grabbed a hold of that and says, oh, this is the story about the virgin birth, and then writes, his gospel according to that. Well, that's what many skeptics say. Christians have a different version of it. But anyhow, the point is that it's an example of where things are taken out of context. Things are not in context. When you read those next chapters after 7:14, you get to chapter 8, you find that, no, this isn't talking about a Messiah. This isn't a messianic prophecy. And so you find that happens over and over with Christians because they so desperately want to shoehorn Jesus back into the Old Testament. They so desperately want their precious Savior to be real and for all of this to have been something that was foretold. And that's what this guy was doing. He was trying to use the book of Daniel to say that, yep, see, this just proves right here we have good reason to believe that the Bible is historical and accurate. Well, because it has a little bit of history in it? Okay, sure. We can concede to that the Old Testament has a portion of history, but a lot of it can be construed as fictional history because there are many things in there that we don't see in the naturalistic world. You say, well, just because we don't see them today doesn't mean they have. Okay, Moses parting the Red Sea. I mean, it took them 140 years, whatever it was, to go in the desert and the wilderness to wander to get where. Oh, well, God just did that to punish them. And I'm like, okay, they only had to go so many 100 miles, and it took them 40 years or whatever it was to do it. I mean, there's tons and tons. We don't see talking donkeys. We don't see talking snakes. There's so many things that defy the laws of physics. That the world doesn't work this way, and so why should we believe? So there's all these claims that are made by the religious people, but is the evidence great? Well, it depends on who you talk to. I mean, yeah, sure, you talk to many Christians, and I don't know if they're honest with themselves. Will they concede and say, yeah, okay, we recognize that this is a bit problematic. There's some problems here, or if they're going to just be like, nope, I'm going to believe it hook, line, and sinker. And then you got the skeptics who are out there who are saying, well, you know what? This is what it would take for me to believe. This is what I would require as evidence. And this is almost unanimous among many skeptics and atheists that it's not going to take a great deal more of evidence. It's the quality of evidence that's being put forth. And if you got issues with, you can see these are interpolations in the scriptures, and you can see these things. There are problems, and so what you see is a group of people making great claims and going to great lengths and extraordinary lengths to try to prove their case by inventing, suppressing, just outright writing pseudographical epistles or things attributing to Paul that Paul never wrote. I mean, there's all these problems. There's riddled with all this controversy, and if it's of God, one would not expect that this is the quality of evidence that we would have. We would have greater evidence from the Almighty himself. He wouldn't entrust man to write the Bible and then allow us to screw it up. Oh, well, because man is fallible and God is not. Okay, so why didn't he just write it himself then? Doesn't that make the most sense? That God would have known how messed up we are and how we could get it wrong, and the Bible definitely contains substantial amounts of errors. So how do you explain that? If these contradictions and these errors exist, how can this be the Holy Scripture, the Holy of Holies? Obviously it can't. So again, with great claims comes great evidence. Thanks. Take care.